Description lists, which were referred to prior to HTML5 as definition lists, are lists that consist of two parts for each item. That's a term and a description. Because their syntax is so flexible, many authors don't really fully understand what description lists can do. And that's a shame because they really are one of the most flexible semantic elements in all of HTML. So to show off a little bit of what description lists can do, I've opened up description.htm and the 06_03 folder. Now, just to kind of preview for you what's going on here, we're going to have three description lists that we're going to do. We're going to do a basic one with multiple terms, and one with multiple definitions. If I were to preview this right now in the browser, doesn't look like much is going on there. And that's because inside each one of these headings, we just have some text that we need to group inside of these lists. So let's start with a basic description list so you can sort of see the overall syntax of a description list, and then we'll move on to more of what we can do with them. So below the H4, I'm going to open up a DL. So much like an ordered list and an unordered list, a DL lets the browser know that a description list is forthcoming. The same way that we have an opening and closing tags for our other lists, we have a closing tag for the DL as well. And I'm going to move that in a little bit so it formats a little nicer visually. So now, as I mentioned, instead of a list item like we have in ordered and unordered list, the individual items within a definition list are made up of multiple items. We have a DT for term and we have a DD for description. So this unordered list right here, I'm going to tab this in a little bit. That is going to be a DT. So the terms always come first. And I'm going to surround that with a DT. And then the next sentence, grouping of list items in no specific order, I'm going to say DD. So you can kind of see the semantics in play here. Unordered list is the term. The description is grouping of list items in no specific order. So we're going to do that for each one of these. And I think the easiest thing for me to do is go ahead and tab these over now so that when I add the tags, everything formats nicely. Now remember, each of these DTs and DDs have opening and closing tags, and the order in which you do them matters dramatically. So in this case of a basic list where we have one term and one definition, they need to follow each other in sequence. So now, semantically, this actually makes a whole lot more sense. It's just easier for us to read even within the code. Each one of these list types is described using a term, and then we have a brief description of them, and we're using the DT and the DD tags to do that. Now, if I save this and go out to the browser, you can see how this is typically rendered by a browser. Most browsers will render the terms as top-level items and do the descriptions as inset. So they give them a little bit of an inset, a little bit of a margin on the left-hand side, and display them that way. But through CSS, you can make them display any way that you want. So they're very, very flexible. Okay, so that's a basic description list. A basic description list is going to have multiple items. It's going to have a term followed by a definition and one term for one definition. Now, they don't have to be that way. You can do them any way that you'd like. For example, you could have a definition or description that has multiple terms applied to it. Let's go down to the next grouping, and we'll go ahead and open up another definition list. And again, I have the opening definition list tag, and I've got the closing definition list tag. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to take all these guys, tab them in a little bit. I'm going to do 3 DTs around each of these. So you can see that this is the term DL description definition list that people might see when they're looking at definitions of this list type. Remember, prior to HTML5, these were referred to as definition lists. So a lot of documents out there still refer to them that way. And as a matter of fact, throughout this example, you've probably heard me refer to them as definition lists a few times. I just can't seem to get it out of my head. All right, now, the DD that I've got below this, I only have one, even though there's 2 blocks of text down here. Now, the reason I did that is because I also wanted to show you how flexible these are in terms of the content that you can have inside of them. For the most part, you can put anything you want to in a term or a definition. You can put tables, you can put other lists. In this case, I'm going to do paragraphs. And I want each of these to be contained within their own paragraph. So it's okay to put more complicated structures within one of these lists. So now if I save this and go back at the browser, you can see that for this particular list, it says DL description definition list, It's a list that groups content together by terms and descriptions used frequently by facts, glossaries, and dictionaries. And then until HTML5, definition lists were frequently used to mark up dialogue. That practice is discouraged now, but no suitable semantic alternative has been proposed, leading to its continued widespread use for dialogue. And that is definitely one of the things that definition lists are used for. They're used for glossaries, frequently asked questions, dictionaries, even to mark up dialogue between multiple parties, because they are so flexible. Now, the last definition list that we're going to do is one that allows us to do multiple descriptions. So in the previous definition list, we had multiple terms. In this one, we're going to have multiple descriptions. So again, I'm going to create an opening and a closing DL tag. And here we're marking up what is, for lack of a better term, metadata. So for this course, HTML Essential Training, we've got the course itself, the author, yours truly. We have producer Dan Weston, and then we have 3 technical reviewers, Simon Allardyce, Garrick Chow, and Josh Vergatner. So all of these 3 people belong to this one term, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with marking up the list like this. So we're going to do a DT for the course, a DD for the course name. We'll do a DT for the author, and then a DD for my name. Producer will get terms. And Dan, who is one of my favorite producers here at lynda.com, will get the description. Now, it's perfectly normal for metadata to be marked up in this way, and the description lists are used quite frequently to mark up metadata, credits, things like that. Now, in this case, for technical reviewers, we have 3 of them. So I want to go ahead and make sure they're all defined as descriptions. So instead of wrapping them all in a single DD, I'm going to wrap them all in individual DDs. So you can have 3 descriptions attached to one term, and that is perfectly acceptable and semantic. You might have thought that we were going to group them all in one big description, but in fact, they are individual units and they need to be represented as such. All right, so we have 3 technical reviewers. These are my buddies, Simon Allardyce, Garrick Chow, who are also authors here at lynda.com, and Josh Vergatner, who is one of the best live action directors we have. He's a really talented individual. So if I look at that within the browser and scroll down, we can see how this is represented. There's course, author, producer, and technical reviewers. Notice that they're all indented because they belong to that one term. So that gives you a little taste of what you can do with description lists. When you first start using them, it may take you a little while before you're totally comfortable with the syntax, and that's understandable. But once you understand how they work, you'll really appreciate the flexibility that description lists give you when you're grouping content.